Rudy Revelation.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
This is a conspiracy. This is a conspiracy.
Hey everyone, welcome to today's episode. It is February 4th, 2025. Thanks for joining me today. Donald Trump channels Javier Milei, the president of Argentina, as the purge continues. The deep state is on the run, and the Democrats defend the worst of the bureaucracy. So we got a lot to get through this morning, so let's get to it. Breaking headlines for today, Tuesday, February 4th. All right, we'll start with the mainstream media here with the Associated Press. Trump agrees to pause tariffs on Canada and Mexico after they pledged to boost border enforcement. So if you weren't paying attention to the news, basically what happened is Trump, in response to the inaction on the border, particularly dealing with the fentanyl crisis, that Mexico and Canada must stop illegal immigration and stop the fentanyl coming across the border. So he proposed leveling a 25% tariff against the United States' two neighbors, Canada and Mexico, as well as a 10% tariff on China. Now, everybody freaked out about this. I even got a little nervous at the start of a tariff war or a trade war. But as I mentioned previously, we have all the leverage. The U.S. has the biggest consumer market. Everybody wants in. And so Canada and Mexico quickly caved. The tariffs have been put on pause. Donald Trump says it's very likely that they will go into place, some sort of tariff. But this is all going to be negotiated. And we're going to get into China in just a second. PJ Media is reporting more winning Mexico caves to Trump will send troops to border. Apparently, it's 10,000 troops. If you look at the U.S. side of the border, we have soldiers on the border as well as National Guard troops, etc. So illegal crossings have gone down to a trickle. Just the News is reporting Trump's game of trade chicken defines market worries, extracts concessions. As I mentioned earlier, it's unlikely that countries are going to be able to win a game of nerves with Donald Trump specifically, but also with the United States. As I said, the United States doles out aid to almost every country, every nation on the globe, as well as people that export want access to our markets. China, Europe, Canada, Mexico, Guatemala, Costa Rica. Most countries want in. The Post-Millennial is reporting Canada to implement $1.3 billion border plan, tariffs delayed 30 days. Proposed tariffs will be paused for at least 30 days while we work together, according to, I think that's Trudeau, where that quote comes from. Like I said, not surprising. the so-called game of chicken isn't much of a game at all. We will see exactly what happens. Now, most of our allies, Canada, Mexico, whoever it may be, will quickly work with the United States. Our adversaries, however, like China, the New York Times is reporting China swiftly counters Trump tariffs with a flurry of trade curbs after a 10% tariff on Chinese products took effect on Tuesday. China announced retaliatory measures, including tariffs and an investigation into Google. Well, I don't care about that. I don't have much love for Google. And so I'm not really worried if China is going to investigate Google. I think Google needs investigation, but that's beside the point. As I said previously, this is only going to hurt people that offshore manufacturing. So will it hurt people going to Walmart? Perhaps. 10% is significant. Will places like Walmart or other manufacturers that offshore their manufacturer to China or manufacturing to China, will they raise prices? Maybe. Maybe they'll just move their manufacturing out of China. The whole idea behind this, of course, is to have companies reverse their current policies of offshoring jobs and offshoring wealth to the Chinese and other places when it should remain here in the United States. Will this nouveau isolationism, will this work for the American people? Well, we're hoping, because the other way, the status quo wasn't working. As much as progressives and Democrats and liberals constantly fight against the status quo, in the case of Joe Biden, he was indeed protecting the status quo. Not only that, but protecting his own operation, his family business of extracting graft from American taxpayers and the Chinese and whoever else was involved. So we'll go back to this story from the New York Times. The Chinese government came back with a series of retaliatory steps, including additional tariffs on liquefied natural gas, coal, farm machinery, and other products from the United States. It also said it had implemented restrictions on the export of certain critical minerals, many of which are used in production of high-tech products. In addition, the Chinese market regulators had launched an anti-monopoly investigation into Google. Google is blocked from China's internet, but the move may disrupt the company's dealings with Chinese companies. It is what it is. When you're renovating, it's always going to get worse before it gets better. So in the demo phase, there might be some difficulty, but just what we saw in Argentina, at first, everybody was sweating and shitting a brick over what Javier Milei was doing there. But already, within the first year, things are already looking better, and their finances are back in the black, and the hyperinflation is eased, and things are looking rosier in Argentina. We can only hope the same for us. Next article up is from the Washington Examiner. White House move to dismantle USAID sets off showdown with Democrats. Well, as I stated previously, my issue with USAID is it is a front for the CIA. Was that its original intention when it was created by John F. Kennedy? Probably not. But it was quickly used by the CIA to hide the CIA covert operations, espionage. So the spies that they couldn't see, the problem is if you get spies into the embassy, people assume embassy personnel are spies. the country hosting them. But they don't always believe that the CIA would enable agents or insert agents into aid organizations, but that's exactly what they did. Not only that, but they use USAID as a slush fund for operations that are directed by the CIA, but can be worked outside of the CIA budget. Seemingly innocuous shit like transgender, pushing transgender on different countries and states. So the article said congressional Democrats are protesting President Donald Trump's efforts to shutter a federal humanitarian aid agency, calling the move illegal as Republicans give the administration leeway. As I said yesterday, a long leash. I'm willing to give Trump a long leash, particularly in the first quarter of the administration. Democrats attempted to enter the closed headquarters of the U.S. Agency for International Development. What it does is block development. So the Democrats attempted to enter the headquarters on Monday, only to be denied entry as ex-CEO Elon Musk, head of the Department of Government Efficiency, works to dissolve it into the State Department. Marco Rubio is also mentioned that he is now head of USAID. And that's the next headline from Real Clear Politics. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, I'm now acting director of USAID. I am the captain now. Next headline up is from the Washington Examiner. Trump is taking on the shadow regulatory state. President Donald Trump's much anticipated deregulation executive order signed last week goes further than any other he did in his first term. Not only does it require agencies to eliminate 10 regulations for every new one, but it also directly targets guidance documents, the unaccountable tools federal bureaucrats have long used to impose regulation without going through formal rulemaking. And if you don't know what guidance documents are, they have all these loopholes in the regulatory and government agencies that they pay lawyers out of your tax dollars to devise ways of skirting the proper ways of doing things. I mean, everybody does it, but guidance documents are the way the regulatory agencies enforce things that aren't even rules. And so they go around enforcing things that so-called rules that haven't even gone through the proper channels. So they're enforcing things that aren't really rules. So going back to USAID from PJ Media, USAID paid the terrorists to kill us. And if you didn't know any of this, it may seem shocking to you that a government entity that has the word aid in its acronym would ever be accused of doing dirty tricks or worse against the friends and the foes of the United States, much less be defanged or shut down by Donald Trump. For the world's lefties, this defanging is unthinkable. But now we're finding out all kinds of skullduggery attributed to our cover revolutionistas at the U.S. Agency of International Development. Victoria Nuland and Samantha Power and their kindred through the years and color revolution coups have been their specialty. See Ukraine 2014. Exactly. Really go all the way back to people often talk about the Maidan Revolution in 2014 in Ukraine, but no one talks about the Orange Revolution in 2007, which failed. Well, PJ Media goes on to say, need a race riot in Africa? No problem. USA is your go-to riot planner. Want to force out democratically elected president? Call USAID. I've known for some time, even before the Cuba thing, which was the most famous publicization of USAID skullduggery is when the CIA used US aid to fund Cuban DJs to push anti-communist propaganda. I'm not against pushing anti-communist propaganda. However, I'm against the CIA using a so-called US aid agency. And I talk to people in other countries. Everybody assumes US aid is the CIA. So it may be mysterious to Americans, but for most people around the world, US aid is looked at very skeptically. The story goes on to say, but you may not have heard this one unless you follow the work of former CIA targeter and Defense Department operative Sarah Adams. See your interview on the Sean Ryan Show podcast. So this person has made the rounds, but her most important interview was with Sean Ryan, and she exposed a lot of stuff. So you can check that out if you want. She tracked the Al-Qaeda operation, and operators like Jake Sullivan and Hillary Clinton denied were part of the Benghazi attack and proved it was pre-planned Al-Qaeda terrorist attack. Benghazi. Because if you didn't know, the left, the Democrats, the liberals, they're in league with Islamic terror to some extent. It was more so, and everybody, even the right was, even the Republicans were, the neocons were, when most of the Al-Qaeda was controlled by the Wahhabists in Saudi Arabia, but that has changed. In any case, the story goes on to say, and Adams has tracked back the money being sent by the United States government to our enemies, the people we went to war against to settle the score for 9/11. Story goes on to say, Catherine reports nearby that USAID dollars support Iran's proxies Hamas. If that's shocking, then you'll want to sit down for the next revelation. The U.S. State Department and USAID paid millions of dollars per week to the Taliban, the bin Laden family leading the group, and the Haqqani terror network. Well, none of this is really surprising because, well, it wasn't surprising to me, but if you would go down line item, the foreign aid that we send all over the world, a lot of it goes to people that we spent billions fighting, including the Taliban. So let's go to the New York Times. Inside Musk's aggressive incursion into the federal government. In Elon Musk's first 2 weeks in government, his lieutenants gained access to closely held financial and data systems, passing aside career officials who warned that they would be defined protocols. That's insubordination. They moved swiftly to shutter specific programs and even an entire agency that had come into Mr. Musk's crosshairs. They bombarded federal employees with messages suggesting they were lazy and encouraging them to leave their jobs. See, what Elon Musk did is he got into the Treasury Department and he went through all the paychecks that go to federal employees. And then he pushed it up against what their job descriptions were and what they were necessarily doing. Empowered by President Trump, Mr. Musk is waging a largely unchecked war against the federal bureaucracy. Well, if it's unchecked now, I just think it's chainsaw time. And the Democratic Party is in complete disarray. So they're in no position to make any attempt to block it. They're going to have a hard time. Because if you saw, well, we're going to get to the DNC nominating committee and meeting in just a second, but you probably saw the videos of the Democrats dancing around. Really pitiful. In any case, back to the article. Top officials at the Treasury Department and the U.S. Agency for International Development who objected to the actions of his representatives were swiftly pushed aside. And Mr. Musk's efforts to shut down U.S. aid, a key source of foreign assistance, have reverberated around the globe. I mentioned before, the New York Times, which knows better, is covering, well, the New York Times is it's not completely captured by the CIA, but they have agents in there. And including the media operation I worked for, it was apparent who was calling the shots, where their allegiance lies, what kind of stories you were doing in regards to federal government, Trump, etc. In any case, Mr. Musk, the world's richest man, is sweeping through the federal government as a singular force, creating major upheaval as he looks to put an ideological stamp on the bureaucracy and rid the system of those he and the president deride as deep state. Ooh, state. Well, it's not who the president derides as the deep state. It is the entrenched bureaucracy who, during Trump's first term, was insubordinate. And you can't have insubordination in the federal government because the elected representative, who was Trump, is the one that the people who elected him want to be making decisions, not people at USAID, not people in the Treasury Department or any other federal department, federal lifers who have political allegiance to other people than their commander-in-chief. I mean, the commander-in-chief is just not the commander-in-chief of the army, commander-in-chief of the entire federal government. So if Donald Trump walks into a U.S. federal department, he could fire anybody and tell anybody to do anything. Washington Post is reporting U.S. attorney hints at prosecutions over targeting of DOJ employees. Interim U.S. Attorney Edward Martin alleged in a statement Monday that his office in D.C. has found evidence that people committed acts that appear to violate the law in targeting employees of Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency. An unusual statement that came without any public criminal charges. Hours after making a letter he wrote to Musk saying the U.S. Attorney's Office would pursue any and all legal action against anyone who impedes your work or threatens your people. Martin posted on X that his initial review of the evidence had found wrongdoing and hinted that he planned to take legal action against the deep state and Democrats. I don't care if you don't like Trump and you work for the federal government. He's your fucking boss. We put him in there, so fuck off. All right, so there's more to talk about as far as the new Secretary of State, who is not only taken under his umbrella USAID, but is still on his tour of Latin America. The Washington Times is reporting Rubio says El Salvador will take deportees from U.S. of any nationality. So, Bukele in El Salvador, who had built brand new massive prisons to house all the criminals, mainly MS-13 gang members, to dismantle the network, MS-13 network in El Salvador, he's got room. So he told President Trump, and Bukele is a Trumpite, and Bukele said, I built these massive prisons. I'll take some people. I mean, we'll have to pay them probably, but we'll see how that works out. So that's good. One American News is reporting CEO Chris Wright confirmed to lead Energy Department. Post-millennial breaking news, Trump nominates Joe Kent as director of National Counterterrorism Center. Joe knows the terrible cost of terrorism, losing his wonderful wife Shannon, a great American hero who was killed in the fight against ISIS. So Joe Kent is a former Green Beret who was running several times unsuccessfully for a congressional seat in Washington State, which, is the Pacific Northwest. So that's the bastion for the crazy liberal movement. I would say progressive, because liberalism is what liberalism is you want the state United States, the federal government, to spend money helping people. Okay. That's not the same as progressives. You can be a liberal and be against DEI or transgenderism or all these other things. The left won't let you believe that, but that's the truth. But if you're a progressive, you can't abandon those things. So it's really, those things are really quite radical almost. It's almost more extreme than progressivism. It's really radical. But I hope, I don't know, is that part of the National Counterterrorism Center? I don't know, is that part of the NSC? Or where that exactly is going to fall? Is that a civilian agency? Is that part of the Department of Defense? Scott Bessent, the Wall Street Journal is reporting Scott Bessent takes the helm of consumer finance watchdog, orders halt to work. The CFPB is told to cease efforts on enforcement actions after litigation. So Scott Bessent is the new Secretary of Treasury, and the Trump administration is doing a massive deregulatory push. So anybody who is enforcing and anybody who is drafting regulations is going to come under review. Most of the people are going to be sidelined because Trump made the mistake his first term, which was letting people in who are career politicians, letting them stay in even after finding out that they were bucking his orders or otherwise acting insubordinate. There is good news on the horizon, more good news, I should say. The National Review is reporting Susan Collins announces support for Tulsi Gabbard's confirmation as DNI, or Director of National Intelligence. We were worried about Susan Collins. Good for her. She's got to get on board. I mean, she really, I'm on the fence with Susan Collins. I've liked her for a long time, and then I don't like some of the ways she votes and her excuses for voting. She's usually pretty, she thinks out her decision making and her votes, which is good. My thing is, where are the liberals? Okay, this is going to be the first woman, I believe it's going to be the first woman director of national intelligence, and the first, I guess you could call Tulsi Gabbard a person of color. She's Indian. She's of Indian descent. So and she's a former Democrat. So I don't know why. I can see why that Republicans might have issue, but I don't see why anybody would have issue with her. The only issue we should have with her is the fact that she was a WEF young global leader. So that worries me. And the coup de grace, technical coup here. The Wall Street Journal is the Wall Street Journal is reporting stick with me now. The Wall Street Journal, as I go to the coup de grace. This is exclusive from the Wall Street Journal. Trump advisors weigh plan to dismantle education department. Administration officials are discussing executive order that could shut down key functions of the agency. Well, this is interesting enough, because this agency, the Department of Education, was started by Carter, so it's not that old. It's about 50 years old. But the problem is it puts conditions on education grants. So this is sort of my problem, is the conditions used to be you have to teach people and you have to get test scores up, et cetera, et cetera. But unfortunately, what we see here is that now they're using it as a cultural cudgel with DEI, climate change, genderism, all these different things being requirements to receive federal aid. So as Trump said, we don't need the Department of Education to dole this out. It's become a politicized agency. So, and people since Ronald Reagan, presidents since Ronald Reagan have been talking about shutting it down. I'm all for it. Again, this is in line with Javier Milei, who went around shutting agencies. CNN Politics reports Trump appoints speechwriter fired for attending conference with white nationalists to top State Department role. Don't be fooled here. All right, this guy is Dr. Darren Beattie. Beattie founded the right-wing media outlet Revolver News. I wouldn't consider it right-wing. And they always say right-wing is a euphemism for conservatism, but it's really a euphemism for extremism, which Revolver News is not extremist. The outlet is known for amplifying false conspiracies. CNN is the worst. About the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, including allegations that federal agencies orchestrated aspects of the attack and controlled extremist groups involved in the attack. The most famous thing Darren Beattie is known for as of late with Revolver News, in conjunction with Revolver News, is the pipe bombs. So here it is, coming from me, in all my speculation. The pipe bombs were planted by the FBI or another intelligence agency. It might have not been the FBI, but the pipe bombs they used looked exactly like mock pipe bombs used in FBI training, using egg timers that have been out of manufacture for a decade. Nobody uses the, those wind-up, spring-winded egg timers. They're all digital. And if you're making a pipe bomb in 2022 or 2021 or 2020, whenever it was, why would you use an analog egg timer? Why don't you use a digital timer? You can get digital timers at Radio Shack. You know what I mean? It doesn't make much sense. So, also, as Donald Trump said, the pipe bomber could be identified. He looks right into one of the cameras, and that footage has been edited out of the released versions. So as Trump said, they know who the pipe bomber is. Why haven't they identified him? The reason for the pipe bombing is when the pipe bombs were discovered well before the rally, it allowed the U.S. government to unleash more investigatory powers that otherwise would have been leashed if there wasn't discovery of weapons of mass destruction, so to speak. So that allows them to deploy army snipers and all these other things. So thank God for Dr. Darren Beattie and the fact that there was one news organization, right-wing news organization, that was investigating the pipe bombs. They're the one that FOI'd the footage outside the Democratic headquarters that showed the nonchalance of security. They're allowing school children to walk right by a supposed pipe bomb. Kamala Harris drove right by the pipe bomb. It just, none of it made sense. None of it makes sense. So, amplifying false conspiracy. My problem with CNN and other news organizations, if you can't undermine someone's argument, speculative or otherwise, then you have no purpose as a news organization saying something's false. Then you have to prove the alleged conspiracy is false. You can't. I've got more going in my argument than CNN presents nothing. And so they smear Dr. Beatty as a white supremacist. When he spoke at a conference, it wasn't a white supremacist conference like they lead you to believe. It was a conference where white supremacists apparently attended. How would he know? And Beatty said in his defense that it was strictly academic. He wasn't spouting white supremacism. Why did this? All right. Next headline here is from the New York Post. FCC Chair Brendan Carr says he'll fast-track CBS probe over the editing of Kamala Harris's 60-minute interview. Now, if you didn't know what was going on here during the campaign, 60 Minutes, CBS interviewed Kamala Harris. They previewed the interview with a segment that showed her answering a question poorly. And then when the episode actually aired, that segment had been re-edited to show her giving a different answer that was more cogent. So which way did she answer it? And that was, so Donald Trump is suing CBS, and CBS is getting ready to settle. Variety is reporting CBS News staffers irate over talks of Paramount settling Trump's 60 Minutes lawsuit. The news outlet says it will comply with FCC request for unedited transcript camera feeds from VP Kamala Harris's interview. Thank you, Brendan Carr. Well, that's great news. Because the mainstream media, the corporate fascist propaganda outfits have to be held accountable. Or at least, this is just one more instance where it shows that where the mainstream media, or legacy media as they like to be called now, is on the side of corporate interest and not airing things for public interest. All right, next up here is Washington Times article, Nome ends temporary protected status for 350,000 Venezuelans. If you didn't know what was going on here, so Joe Biden, or the Biden administration, had given temporary protected status for Venezuelans for two reasons. Maduro wasn't taking them back. The Biden administration didn't want to send them back to a communist country, maybe rightfully so. But the way most of these immigrants got here was a lot of them were released from prisons and are criminals and weren't forced to come to the United States, but were expatriated. In any case, so the Biden administration gave them temporary protected status, even though they knew most of them were convicted criminals. And this also includes the Trendaragua prison gang. So there's that. Next up is the New York Post. Illegal migrant cut loose in plea deal after raping sleeping woman. Then the feds stepped in. Article goes on to say an Ecuadorian migrant cut a deal with Queens prosecutors, Queens, New York, by the way, that allowed him to dodge jail time for rape, but he couldn't outrun the feds. Hale Cardenas, 27, was picked up by federal agents in Jamaica, Queens on Monday, less than a month after he was freed in the horrifying 2023 rape and sex abuse case. The DEA continues, along with the Justice Department and other federal law enforcement partners, to assist DHS with their immigration enforcement efforts targeting violent illegal criminals, said the New York Division of Federal Drug Busting Agency. So that's the DEA New York. And we got more from the fight against illegal immigration. Border czar Tom Homan says he would seek prosecution if New Jersey governor sheltered illegal migrant at home. This is from Fox News. A representative for governor of New Jersey, Phil Murphy's office, says governor's remarks led to misunderstanding. So if you didn't see this interview with Governor Phil Murphy, I forget where it was, on what channel, what network. But the governor of New Jersey said that he invited an illegal immigrant, legal alien, to stay with him at his home because of her fear of being deported. Now, and then Tom Homan said, well, if you do that, you're breaking the law. So we have another big story here from One American News, and it's really big, and you might have heard this already. So the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, claims Ukraine only received $75 billion of the $177 billion in U.S. aid. Doesn't know where all that money went. And he's quoted in the story as saying, when I hear, both in the past and even now, from the U.S. that America has provided Ukraine with hundreds of billions, as the president of a nation at war, I can tell you we've received no more than $75 billion, he stated in this past weekend in an interview with the Associated Press. So when people, of course, you don't see this in the Associated Press, though. So when people talk about 177 billion or even 200 billion, we've never received that. We're talking about tangible things because this aid didn't come as cash, but rather as weapons, which amounted to about US 70 billion, he continued. The Ukrainian president went on to add that Kiev is grateful for the support of the United States, but when it said that Ukraine received 200 billion to support the army during the war, that's not true. I don't know where all the money went. Of course. It was a money, we knew this from what was it? FTX? What was that? Cryptocurrency outfit with Sam Bankman-Fried? Was it FTX? We learned from that trial that they were laundering money through Ukraine, and that a lot of the money that was sent to Ukraine was just funneled back through crypto back to the Democratic Party. Got another article up here from Real Clear Politics. Steve Bannon says Trump's Monroe Doctrine 2.0 strategy is more than tariffs, economically and strategically. So I got pinged yesterday for saying it was Wilson. It wasn't Wilson. It was Monroe, James Monroe. It's called the Monroe Doctrine, which is a hemispheric foreign policy by the United States to say all the countries in the Western Hemisphere, that's South America and North America, need to be friendly or have a working relationship with the United States. So that has fallen by the wayside, obviously. So Trump is trying to reinstate parts of the Monroe Doctrine. That's the whole thing behind the Panama Canal, treaties with South American countries, trying to push out China, and also the interest strategically in Greenland. From the post-millennial, Ilhan Omar claims Trump is a dictator for pausing foreign aid through USAID, claims agency saved her life. I am exceptionally upset about USAID, she says. I don't give a fuck about Ilhan Omar. The only reason she was ever elected is because her district imported thousands of Somalis, and she is Somali, and so she got elected to represent a Somali community. So no surprise. She is a construct of the CIA. So why is she exceptionally upset by gutting USAID? Is because she is a product of USAID, of the CIA, as much of the squad is, particularly OAC and her, but Rashida Tlaib perhaps also. This nouveau mod squad was a political construct. They were constructed by intelligence. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that the U.S. intelligence agencies, not just the U.S., Western intelligence agencies, are really responsible for the culture war that China is cheering on and taking part in, that's undermined U.S. sovereignty, among other things. Behind a Cloward and Piven scheme, all these other things. So, and to go on about how radical the Democratic Party has become and haven't learned any lessons from their loss. They did not go and lick their wounds. They they walked right back into the briar patch. So the Washington Examiner is reporting David Hogg wins election as vice chair of the DNC. Now, if you didn't know who David Hogg was a survivor from the Parkman Stone Douglas High School there in Florida that was victim from a mass shooter, supposedly Nicholas Cruz, a student there. I don't believe that he was solely responsible, and I'm not going to digress into why I believe that is. But this kid was made into sort of a star for the Democrats and was bandying about the country talking about taking away guns. So, but the funny thing is, the Democrats recently are talking, including Ilhan Omar, about unconstitutionality. Taking away people's guns is unconstitutional. So, again, this is a losing path for them. Do some people want gun control? Yeah. But more people start thinking about gun control when their pockets are full. When their pockets are empty, they want a better economy that serves everybody. So good for David Hogg, bad for the Democratic Party. And he was being groomed anyway. He was part of what was, in my belief, a contrived incident. I'm not saying that people didn't die. I'm just saying that there was a lot going on there that was suspect. But I will say no more. So, another article from the Post-Millennial. Washington Dems push to allow felons to volunteer in schools. Last week, Democrat lawmakers rejected an amendment to another bill that would have required schools to inform parents if their child was a victim of sexual abuse. But what were we talking about here? Anyone wanting to volunteer in Washington public schools must undergo a background check, which will usually flag a criminal conviction. But Representative Tara Simmons, an ex-con who served time for theft, drug, and firearm offenses, is the lead sponsor for House Bill 1189, which would require school districts to inform applicants about the option to submit proof of rehabilitation, and then possibly be allowed to volunteer in a school regardless of what crime they committed. Well, isn't that sweet? So felons, convicted felons, should not be allowed to volunteer in schools, period. So I'm not saying that they shouldn't have job interviews, but you're talking about volunteering in schools. Should they be able to volunteer in other programs, after school, extracurricular, boys and girls clubs? Sure, maybe. But if the taxpayers don't want it, and I don't see how a taxpayer would want that. And I'm all for giving felons the opportunity to work. I mean, they have to live. But allowing, and you don't even know what type of offenses they were convicted of. They could be pedophiles or child predators. All right, so the Federalist is reporting how Democrats plan to use the Wisconsin Supreme Court election to rig the 2026 midterms. I'm just going to go through this quickly. So what has been happening in Wisconsin is they've been trying to undermine the electoral process to push in Supreme Court, Wisconsin Supreme Court justices, to allow them to gerrymander districts so they could shut out Republicans. Los Angeles Times is reporting in this opinion piece, corporate America isn't abandoning DEI, it's just rebranding it. So for those of you celebrating, you need to take closer looks at places like Target and Costco. One American News is reporting third soldier inside Black Hawk helicopter involved in DC crash identified. They revised this article. So this person, Captain Rebecca Lobash, was a pilot on board, and she only had 450 flight hours, yet she was put as pilot in charge. Next headline up. And see an active August leadership. Shake up. You get in the science of Dems files, people airborne innocent. It's needed brave volunteers. This is New York Times. And say, other people say, doesn't it violate the Hippocratic Oath? How can a doctor do this? They're making people sick. Give them experiment and Reuters, Beyonce wins top prize the first time with Cali Car. It wasn't the top for stating, it was the grand prize, which is top album. It was album, all categories. So, but I don't know if it won in the category. Wall Street Journal is reporting University of California schools illegal rates and students on the heels of the Trump's bid to dismantle diversity efforts in the government. Spokesman of Washington State CDC scrubs research databases referencing sexual orientation, gender, Daily Mail, credible image capture, U.S. Navy testing its nuclear weapon that never runs out of power. Sorry about that. I just had to technical difficulties, so new today. You can't win. Right, and so there's this other article here from the Wall Street Journal, which is important. Meet the blue-collar voters making Germany's AfD mainstream. The far-right party, its conservative party, walks in the steps of MAGA movement by courting support in depressed, diverse industrial towns once dominated by the left. Well, what the reasoning behind this is, of course, globalist policies devised by supranational entities don't take into account the citizenry of said country, United States or Germany or whatever. So when you have the UN or the EU or the WHO making decisions for your country, usually there's an ulterior motive. So this doesn't surprise me at all. Working class people have gotten poorer. I mean, the rich have gotten richer, but the problem is there is an agenda that doesn't take into account the wherewithal for working people. So middle income folks and what have you. Thanks for joining me today. There's a lot to get through. A lot of news, so we're going to keep praying for Trump, and hopefully he's going to keep doing what he's doing. Thanks for joining me today. Don't forget to engage the channel, like, subscribe, leave a comment, share the podcast. Stay tuned tonight. Episode, I think it's 105 of Tuesdays with Perry. We'll see if I can get him on the line. We have another episode of that. We usually go live about 9:15. So stay tuned for that, where we will discuss another week of the Trump administration, slashing and burning. We're also going to talk about what the Dems are doing in their defense, and they don't really have much of a defense. So remember, you're under attack psychologically, biologically. Stay hip to that trick. Join me every day, Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. on Rumble. Monday's like 10:30. I give myself a break on Monday mornings. Check out my other website, libpop.org, or on social media, X, Facebook, Get Our Minds, True Social, Substack. Again, I appreciate you joining me today. And I'll see you tonight, hopefully. If not, I'll see you tomorrow. Respect.
You can't handle the truth. This is a conspiracy.
The New World Order. The New World Order.
This is a conspiracy. That's what